Alright, we're going to be doing some stage 2 cams. 111 Indian Thunderstroke. I personally really like doing this job. It's pretty straightforward. Indian has come out with an awesome tool. Really helps the whole process. At the same time, it can be a job that really goes south really fast. And I will show you that later on in the video when we get to that point. As for now, don't even need to drain the oil. The oil is below this whole cam compartment here, so no need for that. Typically, floorboard has to come off, and that cam cover obviously has to come off. First thing I did was pop the chain tensioner off, cam chain tensioner off, and I put a punch to hold back that guide. You can take off the guide if you'd like. I have done it. There's really no need to take it off, and that spring is just not the easiest to get back on. Pop the other guide off, and then go ahead and loosen the two crank gears. Remove those bolts, and the gears should slide right off with the chain. And always be sure to watch your keys. Last thing you want is one of those keys to fall down into the case itself. Not fun. Next step, we're going to want to take that whole cam plate assembly off. Go ahead and take out those two exhaust cam bolts, and then there's 4 6mm Allens that are holding that cam plate to the case. Now that we got all the bolts out, we're ready to take the plate off. This step is one of those steps where it'll go south real fast. The key here is nice and easy. The cams are only stuck to those holes by stiction from oil, so if you're not careful on removing this plate and you pull a cam with it, your rods will fall down. And unfortunately, the way this engine is designed, the only way to access the push rods is through the top of the engine, which means dropping your engine and going in from the top. Not fun. I've done it once. Once the cam plate's off, you're going to want to take each one of these cam gears off. They are split gears, so there's going to be a little resistance. So I like to hold a thumb or a finger on the inside of the cam and push out with the gear. And you'll find that once one comes off, the other two come off pretty easy. But again, nice and easy. Do not pull the cams out. It's time to install the super sweet Indian tooling. I don't know the part number. Don't know off the top of my head. But here it is. It screws onto the case with supplied bolts into the existing holes. And just run those guys down nice and snug. And go ahead and snug up the bottom two bolts to secure the bottom half of the tooling. Once that's all nice and snug, we're going to install the spacers with the existing bolts. Obviously, that intake cam has a dowel pin, so there's one spacer with a hole for that dowel. Once all our bolts are in there nice and tight with the spacers, we're going to take these little rods that have a little cutout on the end of it. And all we're doing here is using that bolt that we just installed to turn the cam, to lift the lifter, and put that rod in place to hold the lifter up. And once you get that lifter up, the cams will be free of tension and they will be ready to remove. As you can see, no tension on my cams. Go ahead and take that bottom half of the tooling off, which will give us room to remove the cams. Once again, that tooling is super cool, very well designed. I like taking them out one by one, that way you don't get mixed up which cam is which. The boxes are clearly marked which one goes where.
That's one of our best routes for the Cadillac. Then if you buy the
Once we got the new cams in, put put that bottom half back in the tooling and just do the opposite of installation for these rods. Take the tension off the lifter, pull the rod out, and you're good to go. And from here on out, just taking the rest of the tooling off of the bike. Alright, everything's off, the new cams are in. Lining up these split gears can be a little tricky. It's not too bad. There's only 2 spots on the gear that have holes to line up with. Find the hole, and what I do is I find the smallest punch I have and I stick it through the hole, which will force the gears to line up, and you'll see here in a second. Kind of tap it through, and now you'll see the split gears are lined up, which makes installation a lot easier. Installing the first exhaust gear can be a little tricky depending on where your cam is at, but that's where the bolt on the intake cam should help you by being able to turn it and lining up wherever you need it to be lined up. Make sure it's all the way flush. The gears will be flush with each other. That they shouldn't protrude at all. So make sure that's in there. Give it a little tap with the rubber mallet. And hold the cam gears and wiggle the punch and it'll come right out. And that's just a shot of the timing marks. The second exhaust cam gear should be super easy. Since the other 2 are already lined up, it should fall right into timing. Usually does. If it doesn't, you got something else wrong. Just tapping the gears, making sure they're all the way in. Put your cam plate back on. So I'll give it some light taps to start, and then I'll just put the 4 bolts in and softly, very slowly run them down in a crisscross pattern. And make sure you install the tensioner with that lower left bolt because it is longer, so it will bottom out if you don't have the chain tensioner. Torque them to spec, should be good. The kit does come with new cam gear bolts, you can tell by the red band on it. Start them by hand, run them down as far as you can. And really cool trick, you just shove a piece of tie strap, in between the gears, which will be enough for you to torque the bolts without the engine turning over every time. If you look closely, you can see there's 2 different colored chain links on this chain for the crank gears. Those 2 line up with the 2 hashes on the gears, which should time those 2 gears perfectly. I haven't had a problem doing it that way yet. It works pretty good. And they just slide on with the key and the dowel pin on the intake cam. Run the new bolts in and torque those to spec. Same way. Reinstall the guide, take the pin out, and we're going to install the chain tensioner. This is pretty easy to install. It's got this little click system. You just push back on that tab and it allows you to push the tension all the way in. And that'll do it. Pop your new gasket and your new cover on. Reflash it if you can. If you can't, highly suggest taking it to a dealer, having them do it. I believe the calibration card's about $100. I don't know if they sell them for cheaper or more. I don't know how that works. Reflash it and should be good to go.